The morning Sophia Turner stepped off the stagecoach in Republic, Missouri, in the summer of 1879. She had no intention of becoming the subject of gossip herself, but fate had other plans. The dusty main street stretched before her like a promise, lined with false-fronted buildings that seemed to lean toward each other as if sharing secrets. She clutched her worn leather satchel and looked around at her new home, taking in the saloon, the general store, the church with its whitewashed steeple pointing toward heaven. Republic was a small town nestled in the southwestern corner of Missouri, where the air smelled of prairie grass and possibility. Sophia had come here to escape St. Louis and the suffocating memory of her father's gambling debts that had forced her to seek employment far from everything she had known. At 22 years old, she had accepted a position as a schoolteacher, a respectable job that would allow her to start over. The stage driver set her trunk down with a heavy thud, tipping his hat before climbing back up to continue his route. Sophia stood alone in the street, watching the townspeople go about their business. A few curious glances came her way, which was to be expected. New arrivals were always a source of interest in small towns. "Miss Turner," a woman's voice called out. Sophia turned to see a plump, smiling woman in a calico dress hurrying toward her. "I'm Margaret Hayes, the mayor's wife. We've been expecting you." "How do you do, Mrs. Hayes?" Sophia extended her hand, grateful for the warm welcome. "Oh, we're so pleased to have you. The children have been without proper instruction for nearly 3 months since Miss Pemberton married and moved to Kansas City. Come along, dear. I'll show you to the boarding house where you'll be staying. Mrs. O'Brien runs a clean establishment, and the food is quite good." As they walked down the street, Mrs. Hayes chattered about the town, pointing out the various establishments. Sophia noticed a tall man leaning against the post outside the general store, his hat pulled low over his eyes. Even from a distance, there was something striking about him, something in the way he held himself perfectly still while the world moved around him. "That's Garrett Reynolds," Mrs. Hayes said, following Sophia's gaze. "Fine cowboy, works at the Double R Ranch just outside town. Keeps to himself mostly. Hasn't spoken more than a handful of words to anyone in the 2 years he's been here. Some say it's because he's hiding from something. Others say he witnessed something terrible that stole his voice, but that's all speculation, of course." Sophia felt the woman pause, clearly hoping for some response or encouragement to continue the speculation. Instead, Sophia simply said, "Well, I'm sure he has his reasons for his silence. It isn't our place to guess at them." Mrs. Hayes blinked, taken slightly aback. "Oh. Well, yes, I suppose you're right." She cleared her throat and continued walking. "The boarding house is just ahead." The boarding house was a 2-story structure with a wide porch and flower boxes in the windows. Mrs. O'Brien, a stern-faced Irish woman with kind eyes, showed Sophia to her room on the 2nd floor. It was small but clean, with a bed, a washstand, a wardrobe, and a window that looked out over the street. "Supper's at 6 o'clock sharp," Mrs. O'Brien said. "Don't be late or you'll go hungry." Sophia unpacked her belongings, hanging her few dresses in the wardrobe and arranging her books on the small shelf above the bed. She had brought her most treasured possessions: her mother's Bible, a collection of Shakespeare's plays, and a leather-bound journal her father had given her before his illness had taken hold and the gambling had begun. That evening at supper, Sophia met the other boarders. There was Mr. Abernathy, the town's banker, a fastidious man who ate his food in precise, measured bites. There was also Miss Clara Sutherland, a seamstress who had never married and seemed content with her independence. And finally, there was young Thomas Wright, a clerk at the general store who couldn't have been more than 19 and who turned bright red whenever anyone addressed him directly. "So, Miss Turner," Miss Sutherland said as she passed the potatoes, "what brings you to Republic?" "I've accepted the position as schoolteacher," Sophia replied. "I'm looking forward to beginning my work with the children." "Well, they certainly need someone with a firm hand," Mr. Abernathy interjected. "The boys especially have been running wild without proper supervision." The conversation continued, and Sophia found herself genuinely enjoying the company. It wasn't until Mrs. O'Brien brought out the apple pie for dessert that the topic turned to gossip. "Did you hear about the Miller girl?" Miss Sutherland said in a low voice. "They say she was seen walking alone with that ranch hand from the Peterson place, well after dark." "Scandalous," Mr. Abernathy muttered. "Now, Clarice," Mrs. O'Brien warned, "we shouldn't be spreading tales." "It isn't a tale if it's true," Miss Sutherland protested. "Mrs. Hayes saw them herself." Sophia set down her fork carefully. Perhaps there was a perfectly innocent explanation. Maybe she needed assistance or was in some kind of trouble. "Or maybe she's the kind of girl who—" "I think," Sophia interrupted gently but firmly, "that we shouldn't speculate about someone's character based on limited information. Miss Miller deserves the same consideration we would hope to receive ourselves." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Miss Sutherland's face flushed, and Mr. Abernathy suddenly became very interested in his pie. Mrs. O'Brien, however, gave Sophia an approving nod. The next day, Sophia began her duties at the schoolhouse, a small building at the edge of town with rows of wooden desks and a large slate board at the front. The children arrived in groups, the older ones shepherding the younger, and Sophia felt her heart warm at the sight of their eager faces. She had 15 students ranging in age from 6 to 14. The older boys tried to test her immediately, whispering among themselves and deliberately dropping their books. Sophia addressed the behavior calmly but firmly, and by the end of the first week, she had won their respect through a combination of fairness and genuine interest in their education. It was on Saturday, her first day off, that Sophia encountered Garrett Reynolds properly for the first time. She had decided to explore the area around town, following a well-worn path that led to a creek about a mile from the main street. The day was warm, and she carried a book of poetry, planning to spend a few peaceful hours reading in the shade. She found a comfortable spot beneath a cottonwood tree, the sound of water burbling over rocks providing a soothing backdrop. She had been reading for perhaps half an hour when she heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Looking up, she saw a rider coming along the creek bank, a magnificent bay horse moving at an easy lope. The rider was Garrett Reynolds. Even if she hadn't recognized him from her first day in town, she would have known by the way he sat his horse, relaxed yet alert, as if he and the animal were one creature. He pulled up when he saw her, his hand automatically going to his hat in a gesture of politeness. "Good afternoon," Sophia called out. He nodded, his eyes meeting hers for just a moment. They were gray, she noticed, the color of storm clouds. He made no move to speak, but he didn't immediately ride away either. "It's a beautiful day," Sophia continued. "I'm new in town." "Sophia Turner, the schoolteacher." Another nod. His horse shifted beneath him, and he settled it with the slightest pressure of his legs. "You come here often?" Sophia asked, not bothered by his silence. There was something in his expression, not unfriendliness but rather a deep reserve, as if he had locked his words away somewhere safe. He hesitated, then nodded once more. His gloved hand gestured toward the creek, then to the open prairie beyond, a sweeping motion that seemed to say this was his refuge, his sanctuary. "I can understand why," Sophia said. "It's peaceful here. A good place to think. Something shifted in his expression, a subtle softening around his eyes. He tipped his hat again, then urged his horse forward, riding on down the creek bank. Sophia watched him go, intrigued. She had encountered silent men before, men who were simply shy or awkward, but Garrett Reynolds was different. His silence seemed intentional, protective even, as if he was guarding something precious inside himself. Over the following weeks, Sophia settled into life in Republic. She threw herself into her teaching, preparing lessons that challenged her students and encouraged them to think critically. In the evenings, she often sat on the boarding house porch with her needlework, enjoying the cooler air and the activity of the street. It was during these evening sessions that she began to notice how often gossip dominated conversation in the town. Women would gather on street corners, their voices low but urgent as they shared the latest rumors. Men would cluster outside the saloon, speculation flowing as freely as the whiskey inside. One evening, Mrs. Hayes and several other women came to visit Mrs. O'Brien, and Sophia found herself drawn into their circle on the porch. The conversation inevitably turned to the mysterious Garrett Reynolds. "I heard he killed a man in Texas," one woman whispered. "That's why he doesn't speak. The guilt has driven him to silence." "Nonsense," another countered. "My husband heard he was betrayed by his business partner and lost everything. The shock of it stole his voice." "I think there was a woman involved," Mrs. Hayes added. "A tragic love affair that ended badly." They all turned to Sophia, clearly expecting her to add her own speculation or at least show interest in their theories. Instead, she set down her needlework and looked at each woman in turn. "I think," she said carefully, "that Mr. Reynolds's past is his own business. Whatever his reasons for silence, he clearly wishes to keep them private. Inventing stories about him seems unkind, especially when he's done nothing to deserve such scrutiny." Mrs. Hayes bristled slightly. "We're simply curious, Miss Turner. Surely there's no harm in that." "Curiosity is natural," Sophia agreed. "But spreading unfounded rumors can cause real harm. What if these stories reached Mr. Reynolds? How would it feel to know that people were inventing tragic histories for you without any knowledge of the truth?" The women exchanged uncomfortable glances. One by one, they found reasons to change the subject or make their excuses to leave. Mrs. O'Brien, however, smiled at Sophia after the guests had departed. "You've got a strong moral compass, my dear," she said. "It's refreshing, though it may not make you popular." "I didn't come here to be popular," Sophia replied. "I came here to teach and to live honestly." Word of Sophia's refusal to engage in gossip spread quickly through the small town. Some people respected her for it, while others found her stance judgmental or sanctimonious. Sophia tried not to let it bother her, focusing instead on her students and her work. She saw Garrett Reynolds occasionally, usually from a distance. He would be riding through town, or she would spot him at the general store purchasing supplies. Each time their paths crossed, he would nod in acknowledgement and she would smile in return. It became a comfortable ritual, this silent greeting between them. Then came the incident with the Peterson family. The Petersons ran a struggling farm on the outskirts of town, and rumors had begun circulating that Mr. Peterson had taken to drinking heavily, and that the family was on the verge of losing their land. The gossip grew more vicious when Mrs. Peterson stopped coming to church, with some suggesting she was too ashamed to show her face, while others whispered that she bore marks of violence. One afternoon, Mrs. Hayes approached Sophia after church with several other women in tow. "Miss Turner, we're organizing a collection for the Peterson family," she began. "But we were wondering if you might have any insight into the children's situation. You teach them, after all. Sophia recognized the trap immediately. They didn't want her insight. They wanted confirmation of their rumors, details they could add to their gossip. The Peterson children are good students, Sophia said. They work hard and are always polite. Yes, but have you noticed anything unusual? Are they hungry? Do they seem frightened? I notice that they are children who deserve our support and prayers, not our speculation, Sophia replied firmly. If you're truly concerned about the family, then by all means, organize your collection. Offer practical help, but please don't ask me to provide fodder for gossip. Mrs. Hayes's face turned red. We weren't Miss Turner. I'm simply trying to understand the situation. Then perhaps you should speak directly to Mrs. Peterson, Sophia suggested. Ask her what she needs, how you can help. That seems far more useful than discussing her troubles behind her back. The women dispersed, clearly offended, and Sophia felt a pang of regret. She hadn't meant to sound harsh, but she was growing weary of the constant rumor-mongering. It seemed impossible to have a conversation in this town without someone trying to drag her into speculation about their neighbors. That evening, as she walked back to the boarding house from the schoolhouse where she had stayed late to prepare lessons, she noticed a figure sitting on a bench outside the church. As she drew closer, she realized it was Garrett Reynolds. He stood when he saw her approaching, his hat in his hands. In the fading light, his expression was serious, almost somber. He gestured toward the bench, clearly inviting her to sit. Sophia hesitated only a moment before accepting. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the sun paint the western sky in shades of orange and pink. Finally, Garrett reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small notebook and a pencil. He wrote something quickly, then handed it to her. The note read, "Thank you." Sophia looked at him in confusion. "For what?" He took the notebook back and wrote again. "For not spreading stories about me. I've heard you refuse to gossip. It means more than you know." "Oh," Sophia said softly, understanding dawning. "You don't need to thank me for that. It's simply the right thing to do." He shook his head and wrote, "Most people don't see it that way. They see silence as mysterious, something to be solved or explained. You see it as my choice." "It is your choice," Sophia agreed. "We all have things we keep private. That's not strange or suspicious. It's human." Garrett's hand moved across the page again. "May I walk you home?" "I'd like that," Sophia said. They walked slowly through the town, Garrett leading his horse by the reins. They didn't speak, or rather, Sophia didn't speak and Garrett didn't write. But the silence between them felt different from the silence Sophia had experienced with others. It wasn't awkward or empty. It was full, rich with unspoken understanding. When they reached the boarding house, Garrett tipped his hat to her, and Sophia saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. It was gratitude, yes, but also something deeper. Interest. Warmth. "Good night, Mr. Reynolds," she said. He smiled then. A real smile that transformed his face, making him look younger and less guarded. Then he mounted his horse and rode off into the gathering darkness. From that evening on, Sophia and Garrett developed an unusual friendship. He would appear at unexpected moments: when she was walking to school, when she was reading by the creek on Saturday afternoons, when she was shopping at the general store. Each encounter was brief, but they communicated through his notebook and her patient responses. She learned that he worked as a ranch hand at the Double R, that he was skilled with horses, that he loved this wild, open country with its endless skies. He learned that she had left St. Louis to escape her father's debts, that she loved teaching, that she believed in treating people with dignity and kindness. The notebook conversations were stilted at first, limited by the time it took to write each response. But gradually, they developed a rhythm. Garrett would write a question. Sophia would answer while he wrote the next question, and they would pass the notebook back and forth like a relay. The townspeople noticed, of course. They noticed everything. Soon, new rumors began circulating, this time about Sophia and the silent cowboy. "I heard they're courting," one woman said loudly in the general store while Sophia was shopping. "How can they be courting if he never speaks?" Another replied, "What kind of marriage would that be? Maybe she's trying to get him to talk. Maybe she sees him as a project." Sophia kept her eyes on the shelf of canned goods, refusing to react. But inside, she felt a mixture of anger and sadness. Couldn't people simply let others live their lives without constant commentary? It was Miss Sutherland who confronted Sophia directly about the matter. One evening at supper, the seamstress set down her fork and said, "Miss Turner, as a fellow unmarried woman, I feel obligated to warn you. People are talking about your friendship with Mr. Reynolds. It's becoming quite the scandal." "A scandal," Sophia repeated. "We're simply friends. Two adults enjoying conversation." "But he doesn't converse," Mr. Abernathy pointed out. "Not in the normal way." "Communication takes many forms," Sophia said. "Just because Mr. Reynolds doesn't speak aloud doesn't mean we don't have meaningful exchanges." "Be that as it may," Miss Sutherland continued, "you should be aware of how it looks. A single woman spending time alone with a man, particularly a man about whom we know so little, with all due respect, Miss Sutherland," Sophia interrupted, "I don't particularly care how it looks. Mr. Reynolds has been nothing but respectful and kind. The fact that people choose to make up stories about him says more about them than about him." "Stories?" Miss Sutherland's voice rose. "Miss Turner, we don't know anything about this man. He could be dangerous." He could be a private person who prefers to keep his own counsel," Sophia said firmly. "That doesn't make him dangerous. It makes him sensible in a town where everyone seems determined to know everyone else's business." The table fell silent. Even Thomas Wright, usually oblivious to tension, seemed to sense the charged atmosphere. Mrs. O'Brien cleared her throat. "Miss Turner has a point," the landlady said. "We've all been guilty of gossip from time to time. Perhaps we should focus more on our own affairs and less on our neighbors." The conversation moved to safer topics, but Sophia could feel the disapproval radiating from Miss Sutherland and Mr. Abernathy. She excused herself as soon as the meal was finished, retreating to her room to avoid further confrontation. She sat by her window, looking out at the darkening street, and wondered if she was being foolish. Was she risking her reputation for a man she barely knew? But even as the thought formed, she rejected it. She knew Garrett in the ways that mattered. She knew his gentleness with animals, the way he removed his hat when he saw her, the thoughtful questions he wrote in his notebook. She knew he was honorable. A few days later, Sophia experienced firsthand the cruelty that gossip could inflict. Sarah Peterson, the eldest daughter of the struggling farm family, came to school with red-rimmed eyes and wouldn't speak to anyone. At recess, Sophia saw several of the older girls whispering and pointing at Sarah, who stood alone by the schoolhouse wall. Sophia approached the group of girls. "What's going on here?" The girls exchanged guilty glances. Finally, one spoke up. "We were just talking about what we heard our mothers saying, Miss Turner, about the Petersons." "And what did you hear?" "That Sarah's father drinks away all their money, that her mother is leaving him, that they'll lose the farm and have to move away." Sophia looked at Sarah, who had heard every word and now had tears streaming down her face. She felt a flash of anger so intense it took her breath away. "Girls," she said, her voice controlled but cold, "do you have any idea how hurtful your words are? Do you understand that Sarah is your classmate, your neighbor, someone who has never done anything to deserve your scorn? But it's true. It doesn't matter if it's true." Sophia's voice rose slightly. Don't you see? Sarah's family is struggling. That's not entertainment. It's not a story to share and embellish. It's real pain, real suffering. And by spreading these rumors, by treating her troubles as something to whisper about, you're making everything worse. The girls looked chastened, shuffling their feet in the dust. Sophia took a deep breath and softened her tone. I want you all to think about how you would feel if your family was going through a difficult time and everyone in town was talking about it. Would you want your troubles discussed at dinner tables and on street corners? Or would you want kindness and privacy? One by one, the girls mumbled apologies and wandered away. Sophia went to Sarah and put a gentle hand on her shoulder. I'm so sorry, Sarah, she said softly. The girl looked up at her with such gratitude and misery that Sophia's heart ached. They're right, though, Miss Turner. My father does drink, and we probably will lose the farm. Then that's your family's struggle to face with dignity, Sophia said. And if people were decent, they would offer help instead of gossip. Come, let's go inside. I have a book I think you might enjoy borrowing. That evening, Sophia was so upset by the incident that she couldn't sit still in the boarding house. She grabbed her shawl and went for a walk, needing the cool air and space to clear her head. Without really intending to, she found herself walking toward the creek. Garrett was there, as she somehow knew he would be. He was sitting on a fallen log, his horse grazing nearby. When he saw her, he stood immediately, his expression questioning. I'm sorry to intrude, Sophia said. I just needed to walk and my feet brought me here. He gestured for her to sit, then retrieved his notebook. What's wrong? He wrote. Sophia explained what had happened at school, her frustration and sadness pouring out. Garrett listened, or rather, watched her face intently as she spoke, and his eyes reflected her own anger at the situation. When she finished, he wrote for a long time. Finally, he handed her the notebook. This is why I stopped speaking. 2 years ago, I worked on a ranch in Kansas. The owner's daughter accused me of making improper advances toward her. It wasn't true. I'd barely spoken to her. But she wanted to marry someone else and needed a scandal to force her father's hand. The rumors spread so fast, got so twisted, that by the end of the week, people believed I'd assaulted her. I was run out of town by a mob. I was innocent, but it didn't matter. Words had power and lies spread faster than truth. Sophia read the words twice, her heart breaking for him. Oh, Garrett. He took the notebook back. After that, I decided silence was safer. If I didn't speak, people couldn't twist my words. They could gossip about my silence, but they couldn't put words in my mouth. It was the only way I could protect myself. That's why you came here, Sophia said, understanding. To start over where no one knew the story. He nodded, then wrote, but the silence became a trap too. People made up new stories to explain it. I couldn't win either way. Until now, Sophia said softly. You're telling me. You're breaking your silence. Garrett looked at her for a long moment, and Sophia felt something shift between them, something profound and intimate. His hand moved across the page again. Only with you. You're the first person in 2 years who hasn't tried to force me to speak or make up stories about why I don't. You just accepted it. Because it's your choice, Sophia said. Your trauma, your healing. No one has the right to demand your voice before you're ready to give it. He reached out then, slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. When she didn't move, his fingers brushed against hers, the touch gentle and tentative. They sat like that as the sun set, hands touching, connected in a way that went deeper than words. Over the next few weeks, Sophia and Garrett's relationship deepened. They continued their notebook conversations, but now there was an added dimension of physical connection. He would help her across a rocky stretch of ground, his hand warm and steady on her elbow. She would touch his arm when making a point, feeling the solid strength beneath his shirt. They were courting, though neither had explicitly said so. The town's gossip about them intensified. Sophia overheard whispers wherever she went. Some people thought she was foolish. Others thought she was calculating, that she had designs on fixing the silent cowboy. A few speculated about what they got up to during their private meetings, their imaginations running wild. Sophia tried to ignore it, but the constant scrutiny wore on her. She wondered if this was what Garrett had felt in Kansas, the weight of everyone's judgment and speculation. It made her more determined than ever not to participate in gossip about others. One Saturday afternoon in October, when the leaves were turning gold and the air had a crisp bite to it, Sophia and Garrett were walking along the creek when they encountered a group of ranch hands from the Double R. They greeted Garrett with easy familiarity, but their eyes turned curious when they saw Sophia. "This the schoolteacher we've heard about?" One of them asked Garrett with a grin. Garrett nodded, his hand moving protectively to Sophia's back. "Heard you two are quite the item," another ranch hand said. "Though I can't figure how you court without talking, Garrett. You writing her poetry in that notebook of yours." The men laughed, not unkindly, but Sophia felt Garrett tense beside her. She stepped forward slightly. "Mr. Reynolds and I communicate just fine," she said pleasantly but firmly. "Though I appreciate your interest, our private conversations are just that, private." The men looked slightly taken aback by her directness. One of them, an older cowboy with a weather-beaten face, tipped his hat. "Didn't mean any disrespect, madam, just making conversation." "Of course," Sophia said. "I hope you all have a pleasant afternoon." She and Garrett continued their walk, leaving the ranch hands behind. Once they were out of earshot, Garrett pulled out his notebook. "You didn't have to do that." "Do what? Stand up for our privacy?" "Yes, I did." Sophia smiled at him. "I won't spread rumors about others, and I won't let others pry into our business with impunity. Fair is fair." Garrett's expression softened. He wrote, "You're the strongest woman I've ever met." "Not strong," Sophia corrected gently. "Just stubborn about doing what's right." As fall deepened into winter, Sophia and Garrett's bond grew stronger. He began meeting her every day after school, walking her back to the boarding house. Sometimes he would bring her small gifts, a smooth stone from the creek, a feather from a hawk, a handful of wildflowers before the frost killed them. She treasured each offering, keeping them in a small box on her dresser. She also began to notice subtle changes in him. He seemed lighter somehow, less burdened. His smiles came more easily. And one evening, as they sat together in the church courtyard, she heard something that made her breath catch. He hummed. It was just a few notes, a melody under his breath as he looked at the stars. When he realized he'd made a sound, he froze, his eyes going wide. Sophia reached for his hand. "It's all right," she said softly. "You can hum. You can sing. You can speak or stay silent. Whatever feels right to you, Garrett. There's no pressure from me." He squeezed her hand, and she saw moisture gleaming in his eyes. He pulled out his notebook. "I haven't made a sound in 2 years. Not a word, not a whistle, nothing. But with you I feel safe. Like maybe I could find my voice again." "You will," Sophia said with certainty. "When you're ready. And if that's tomorrow or 10 years from now, it doesn't matter. I care about you, Garrett Reynolds. Silent or speaking, it's you I care about." He looked at her with such intensity that her heart hammered in her chest. His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. Then, slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned in and kissed her. It was soft and sweet, tentative at first, then deeper as she responded. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Garrett rested his forehead against hers, and Sophia could feel him trembling slightly. "Garrett," she whispered, and his name felt like a prayer on her lips. He pulled back just far enough to look into her eyes, and even without words she could read everything he felt. Love, wonder, hope. She smiled, and he smiled back, that transformation of his face that never failed to move her. The kiss changed things between them. Now there was no question that they were courting seriously. Garrett began sitting with Sophia at church on Sundays, enduring the stares and whispers with quiet dignity. Sophia met his fellow ranch hands and learned about his work with horses. They were building a life together, piece by careful piece, but not everyone was happy about their relationship. Mrs. Hayes, who had taken offense at Sophia's multiple refusals to gossip, began a quiet campaign against her. She spread rumors that Sophia was unsuitable as a schoolteacher, that her attachment to a strange man reflected poor judgment. She suggested to the town council that perhaps they should reconsider Sophia's employment. The mayor, Mrs. Hayes's husband, was a fair man, but he was also aware of public opinion. One afternoon in early December, he came to the schoolhouse just as Sophia was dismissing her students for the day. "Miss Turner, might I have a word?" he asked. Sophia's heart sank, but she kept her expression calm. "Of course, Mayor Hayes." After the last child left, the mayor cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Miss Turner, you're an excellent teacher. The children have flourished under your instruction, and I've received many compliments about your work." "I sense a but coming," Sophia said quietly. But the mayor continued, "There have been concerns raised about your personal conduct, specifically your association with Mr. Reynolds." "My association?" Sophia felt anger beginning to simmer in her chest. "We're courting, Mayor Hayes, respectably and appropriately. What exactly is the concern?" "Well, Mr. Reynolds is. That is, he doesn't. People don't know much about him." "People don't know much about him because they're too busy making up stories instead of simply introducing themselves and getting to know him," Sophia said, her voice rising slightly. "Garrett Reynolds is a good, honorable man. The fact that he chooses not to speak doesn't change that." "Yes, but surely you can see how it looks. Sophia's temper finally broke through. "Mayor Hayes, with all due respect, I've spent 4 months in this town watching people tear each other apart with gossip and rumor. I've watched them speculate about their neighbors' troubles instead of offering help. I've seen reputations damaged and feelings hurt, all in the name of interest or concern, and I've refused to participate in any of it. If that makes me unsuitable as a teacher, then I question what values this town wishes to instill in its children." The mayor looked taken aback. "Miss Turner, I'm not asking you to stop seeing Mr. Reynolds. I'm simply suggesting that you might be more discreet." "I won't hide a relationship I'm proud of," Sophia said firmly. "Garrett has done nothing wrong. I've done nothing wrong. If people choose to gossip about us anyway, that's their choice and their sin, not ours." The mayor sighed. "Very well. I'll inform the council that I find no grounds for complaint regarding your conduct. But Miss Turner, you should know that my wife is quite influential in this town. Making an enemy of her may make your life here difficult." "Then I'll face that difficulty," Sophia said. "I came here to teach and to live honestly. I won't compromise my integrity for social acceptance." After the mayor left, Sophia sat at her desk and let herself shake. She had potentially jeopardized her position, her livelihood. But even as fear crept in, she knew she had made the right choice. She wouldn't abandon her principles or Garrett just to appease gossiping busybodies. That evening, she told Garrett everything. He listened to her account with growing anger visible in his eyes. When she finished, he grabbed his notebook and wrote furiously, "This is my fault. My silence has brought trouble to you. Maybe I should leave Republic, go somewhere else." "No." Sophia's response was vehement. "Garrett, no, you have every right to be here. You have every right to live your life without explaining yourself to anyone. And I have every right to care about you without seeking permission from the town gossips. But your job, my job, is secure as long as I do it well, which I do. Mayor Hayes said so himself. His wife's disapproval is unfortunate, but it isn't the law. Sophia took his hands in hers. I won't let you run again, Garrett. You ran from Kansas because of lies and gossip. You found a home here, work you enjoy, friends. And you found me. I won't let small-minded people drive you away. Garrett stared at her, and she watched several emotions cross his face: gratitude, love, uncertainty. Finally, he pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. She felt him shaking slightly, and she realized he was crying silently. She held him, offering comfort and strength. When he pulled back, his face was wet with tears, but he was smiling. He wrote, "I love you, Sophia Turner. I didn't think I'd ever feel this way about anyone, but I love you." Sophia's heart soared. "I love you too, Garrett Reynolds." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, pouring everything he couldn't say into the connection between them. When they finally broke apart, Sophia was dizzy with emotion. "We'll face this together," she said. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together." Christmas approached, and despite the tension between Sophia and some of the townsfolk, the season brought its own magic. Sophia organized a Christmas program for the school, and her students worked diligently on recitations and songs. She was touched when several parents thanked her for her dedication, making it clear that not everyone in town sided with Mrs. Hayes. Garrett helped the children build a manger seen outside the schoolhouse, his skilled hands crafting beautiful wooden figures. The children adored him, not at all bothered by his silence. They would chatter at him constantly, and he would respond with nods and smiles and the occasional note in his ever-present notebook. One afternoon, little Emma Peterson, Sarah's youngest sister, brought Garrett a drawing she had made of him and his horse. He accepted it solemnly, then knelt down to her level and pulled out his notebook. He wrote something and showed it to her. Emma's face lit up with joy, and she threw her arms around his neck. Later, Sophia asked what he had written. Garrett showed her the notebook. "Your drawing is beautiful. You have real talent. Keep making art." That probably meant the world to her, Sophia said softly. "The Petersons have had such a hard time." Garrett nodded, then wrote, "After Christmas, I want to talk to the Double R owner about hiring Mr. Peterson. I've heard he's good with cattle when he's sober. Maybe steady work would help him." Sophia's eyes filled with tears. "You're such a good man, Garrett." He ducked his head, embarrassed by the praise, but she could see he was pleased. The Christmas program was a great success. The church was packed with families, and the children performed beautifully. Sophia felt proud watching them, seeing how far they had come. Even Sarah Peterson, who had been so hurt by gossip earlier in the year, stood tall and recited her poem with confidence. After the program, there was a social gathering with cookies and hot cider. Sophia noticed Mrs. Hayes holding court in one corner, no doubt spreading more rumors. But she also noticed that many people made a point of compliments to Sophia, thanking her for her hard work with the children. Garrett appeared at her elbow with 2 cups of cider. She accepted one gratefully, and they stood together watching the festivities. Several people nodded politely to Garrett, and a few even smiled. Sophia felt a surge of hope. Maybe things were changing. Maybe people were beginning to see what she saw: a good man who deserved respect, not suspicion. As the gathering wound down and people began heading home, Garrett touched Sophia's arm and gestured toward the door. They stepped outside into the cold December night. The stars were brilliant overhead, and snow had begun to fall in light flurries. Garrett pulled out his notebook, but instead of writing, he hesitated. Sophia waited patiently, her breath forming white clouds in the cold air. Finally, he began to write, and when he handed her the notebook, her hands were shaking as she read. "Sophia, you've changed my life. You saw me when I felt invisible. You defended me when others speculated. You loved me despite my silence, never trying to force me into being someone I wasn't ready to be. You have more integrity in your little finger than most people have in their entire bodies. I want to spend my life with you. I want to build a home with you. I want to grow old watching you teach generations of children to be good and kind and honest. Sophia Turner, will you marry me?" Sophia looked up from the notebook, tears streaming down her face. Garrett was watching her with such hope and vulnerability that her heart felt like it might burst. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Garrett, I'll marry you." He pulled a small box from his pocket. He had clearly planned this moment carefully. Inside was a simple gold band with a small ruby stone. It wasn't extravagant, but it was beautiful. He slid it onto her finger with shaking hands. Then, as Sophia stood there looking at the ring, at this man she loved so deeply, something extraordinary happened. Garrett took a deep breath, and in a voice rusty from disuse but growing stronger with each word, he spoke. "I love you, Sophia. I love you." His voice cracked on the words, but they were clear and real, spoken aloud for the first time in more than 2 years. Sophia gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Garrett," he smiled, tears running down his face. "You gave me back my voice," he said, the words coming easier now. "By never demanding it, by accepting me as I was, you made me feel safe enough to speak again. You gave me back myself." Sophia threw her arms around him, and they held each other in the falling snow, both crying and laughing at once. When they finally pulled apart, Garrett cupped her face in his hands. "I don't know if I'll be able to speak all the time," he admitted. "Sometimes the silence still feels safer. But with you, I want to try." "Then we'll do it together," Sophia said. "Some days you'll speak, some days you'll write, some days you might not communicate much at all, and that's all right too. I love all of you, Garrett, every version of you." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, and when they broke apart, he was smiling that smile that transformed his whole face. "Let's go tell everyone," he said, his voice gaining confidence. "I want the whole town to know you're going to be my wife." They walked back into the church together, hand in hand. The remaining people looked up in surprise when Garrett cleared his throat. "Everyone," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "I have an announcement to make." The room fell completely silent. No one had heard Garrett Reynolds speak since he arrived in Republic. Mrs. Hayes looked like she might faint from shock. "Miss Turner has agreed to marry me," Garrett continued. "And I wanted to thank this town for giving me a place to heal and a chance to start over. I also wanted to say that Sophia Turner is the finest person I've ever known. She refused to spread rumors about me when everyone else was speculating. She defended my privacy and treated me with dignity. She taught me that integrity matters more than popularity. Any of you who have children in her class should count yourselves blessed. I know I'm blessed to have her in my life." Sophia squeezed his hand, her heart overflowing with love and pride. There was a moment of stunned silence, and then Mrs. O'Brien started clapping. Others joined in, and soon the whole room was applauding. Even Mrs. Hayes managed a tight smile and a nod. In the weeks that followed, Garrett's speaking became more regular, though he still had quiet days when he preferred his notebook. The town's attitude toward both him and Sophia shifted. People began treating them with more respect, and the gossip died down at least about them. Sophia continued to refuse to spread rumors about others, and gradually, her example began to influence some of the townspeople. Mrs. O'Brien stopped tolerating gossip at her dinner table. A few other women in town started gently redirecting conversations when they turned to speculation. It wasn't a complete transformation. People would always be curious about their neighbors, but it was a start. Mr. Peterson did get a job at the Double R Ranch, thanks to Garrett speaking to the owner on his behalf. With steady work and income, he stopped drinking, and the Peterson family began to recover. Sophia saw the difference in her students, particularly Sarah, who blossomed without the weight of shame and gossip bearing down on her family. Sophia and Garrett were married in March of 1880 in the same church where he had proposed. The ceremony was small but beautiful, with wildflowers decorating the sanctuary and most of the town in attendance. Sophia wore a cream-colored dress that Miss Sutherland had helped her sew, and Garrett wore his best suit with his boots polished to a shine. When it came time for the vows, Garrett spoke them clearly and firmly, his eyes never leaving Sophia's face. His voice still carried the slight rasp of someone unused to speaking, but to Sophia, it was the most beautiful sound in the world. "I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you," he said. "I promise to support your work and your principles. I promise to speak when I can and to trust you with my silence when I cannot. I promise to build a life with you based on honesty, integrity, and love." Sophia's own vows were equally heartfelt. "I promise to love you without conditions," she said. "To respect your voice in all its forms, to stand beside you against gossip and judgment, to build a home where truth and kindness are the foundation, to love you all my days." They exchanged rings, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Garrett kissed her thoroughly, to the delighted cheers of the congregation. The reception was held in the church courtyard, and Sophia was touched by how many people came to wish them well. Even Mrs. Hayes approached, offering stilted but seemingly genuine congratulations. "I judged you too harshly, Miss Turner, or rather Mrs. Reynolds now," she said. "You stood by your principles even when it wasn't easy. That takes courage." "Thank you, Mrs. Hayes," Sophia replied graciously. "And I hope we can start fresh." The mayor's wife nodded. "I'd like that." Garrett and Sophia moved into a small house on the edge of town, a cozy place with a front porch and enough land for a garden and a few chickens. Garrett continued working at the Double R Ranch, and Sophia kept teaching. They fell into a comfortable rhythm, their days filled with work, and their evenings spent together, talking or reading or simply sitting in companionable silence. Garrett's voice continued to strengthen. There were still days when speaking was difficult, when old anxieties would resurface and he would retreat into silence. But Sophia never pressured him. She had learned to read his moods, to know when he needed quiet and when he needed her to talk enough for both of them. They also continued their notebook conversations, but now they had become a choice rather than a necessity. Sometimes Garrett would write her love notes and leave them around the house for her to find. Sometimes they would pass the notebook back and forth in the evenings, a remnant of their early courtship that neither wanted to give up entirely. The first year of their marriage was blissfully happy. They worked on their home together, building furniture and planting gardens. They attended church and town socials, slowly building friendships with people who had once been suspicious of them. They took long rides into the countryside, exploring the beautiful Missouri landscape, and they talked about their future. They both wanted children, but they agreed to wait a year or two, to give themselves time to fully establish their home and their marriage. They talked about Sophia eventually opening a proper school building instead of the cramped, one-room structure the town currently used. They talked about Garrett maybe starting his own horse breeding operation someday. In the fall of 1880, Sophia discovered she was pregnant. They had planned to wait, but neither was disappointed. Garrett was overjoyed, though also terrified. "What if I can't speak to our child?" he worried. "What if my silence scares them?" "Then we'll teach them about communication in all its forms," Sophia assured him. "They'll learn words from me and patience from you. They'll learn that love doesn't always need volume." Their son was born in May of 1881, a healthy baby boy with Garrett's gray eyes and Sophia's dark hair. They named him Samuel Thomas Reynolds, and he was the light of their lives. Sophia took a brief leave from teaching, and Garrett arranged to work closer to home so he could help with the baby. Samuel grew into a happy, curious toddler. He learned to speak early, babbling constantly, and Garrett would respond to him patiently, sometimes in words and sometimes in gestures. The boy never seemed confused by his father's varying modes of communication. To Samuel, it was simply how Papa was. 2 years later, in 1883, their daughter was born. They named her Grace Margaret Reynolds, and she had Sophia's brown eyes and Garrett's quiet temperament. Where Samuel was boisterous and outgoing, Grace was thoughtful and observant. Sophia returned to teaching when Grace was 6 months old, and Garrett's mother, who had reconciled with him after learning of his marriage and children, came to help with childcare. She was a kind woman who had never believed the rumors about her son in Kansas and had been heartbroken when he disappeared. Their reunion was tearful and joyful, and she became a beloved grandmother to Samuel and Grace. The Reynolds family became a cornerstone of the Republic community. Sophia's students continued to flourish under her instruction, and she became known throughout the region as an exceptional educator. Several of her students went on to attend college, an unusual achievement for children from such a small town. Garrett's reputation as a horseman grew, and in 1885, he finally started his own breeding operation with support from the Double R owner. His ability to communicate with horses, to understand them in ways that went beyond words, made him extraordinarily successful. People came from all over Missouri and even from neighboring states to buy his horses, but what the Reynolds family became most known for was their integrity. Sophia continued to refuse to spread or engage with gossip, and Garrett, when he spoke only truth. They taught their children the same values: to think critically, to refuse to judge without knowledge, to offer kindness before criticism. Samuel and Grace grew up hearing the story of how their parents met, how their mother's refusal to gossip had won their father's heart and helped him find his voice again. It became a family legend, a reminder of what truly mattered. As the years passed, Republic changed. The railroad came through in 1887, bringing new opportunities and new people. The town grew, and with growth came the inevitable changes. But some things remained constant. The Reynolds family remained committed to their principles. Sophia taught for 30 years, influencing hundreds of children. Garrett bred horses and spoke when he could, and used silence when he needed to, never apologizing for either. In 1895, when Sophia was 38 and Garrett was 41, their third child was born, another boy they named James Harrison Reynolds. He was a surprise, coming so many years after Grace, but he was welcomed with joy. Samuel, now 14 and Grace 12, doted on their baby brother. The children grew and thrived. Samuel became a veterinarian, inspired by his father's way with animals. Grace became a teacher like her mother, carrying on the tradition of principled education. And James, the youngest, became a lawyer, fighting for justice and truth in the courtrooms of Missouri. All three credited their parents' example with shaping who they became. They had grown up in a home where integrity mattered more than popularity, where truth was valued over gossip, where people were judged by their character rather than by rumors or appearances. Garrett's voice remained a variable thing throughout his life. Some days he spoke freely and easily. Other days, especially during times of stress or difficulty, he retreated into silence. But it no longer bothered him. He had learned, with Sophia's help, that his worth wasn't determined by his ability to speak. He was valuable, loved, and respected whether he used words or not. Sophia never regretted her choice to refuse gossip, even though it had initially made her unpopular. She had followed her conscience, and in doing so, she had found the love of her life. More than that, she had helped change a small corner of her world, making it slightly kinder and more thoughtful. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1905, the town of Republic threw a celebration for the Reynolds family. Nearly everyone in town attended, including many of Sophia's former students, now grown with children of their own. Speeches were made praising Sophia's years of service as a teacher and Garrett's contribution to the community through his horse breeding. But the most touching moment came when old Mrs. Hayes, now widowed and softened by age, stood to speak. 25 years ago, she said, her voice wavering, I was one of the people who judged this couple harshly. I gossiped about them. I tried to cause trouble for them. But Sophia Reynolds, then Miss Turner, never responded in kind. She stood by her principles with grace and dignity. And in doing so, she taught me something important. She taught me that integrity matters more than being right. That kindness matters more than being interesting. I'm grateful for that lesson, and I'm grateful for her patience with a silly old woman who should have known better. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Sophia and Mrs. Hayes embraced, a final healing of old wounds. That evening, as Sophia and Garrett sat on their porch watching the sunset, a ritual they had maintained throughout their marriage, they reflected on their life together. You ever regret it? Garrett asked, his voice soft. He still sometimes struggled with speaking, but with Sophia he tried. Refusing to gossip, defending me, all of it, it made things hard for you at first. Never, Sophia said firmly. Not for a single moment. You were worth defending. Truth was worth defending. And look at what we've built. She gestured around them, at their home, at the life they had created. We have 3 wonderful children, a community we love, work that matters. We have each other. That's worth more than any amount of popularity. Garrett took her hand, bringing it to his lips. I love you, Sophia Reynolds. You saved me in more ways than I can count. We saved each other, Sophia corrected gently. You taught me that love doesn't need words to be real. You taught me that quiet strength is just as valuable as loud confidence. You taught me what true integrity looks like, someone who stays silent rather than speak lies, someone who holds to their principles even when it costs them everything. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. After a while, Garrett spoke again. Do you remember that day by the creek, when we first really talked? Through the notebook, Sophia said, smiling at the memory. I remember. I was so frustrated with the gossip in town, and you were there, this silent, understanding presence. You could have dismissed me, Garrett said. Could have decided I was too strange, too damaged. But you didn't. You saw past the silence to who I really was. Because that's what love does, Sophia said simply. It looks past the surface to the truth beneath. As full dark settled over Republic, Missouri, Sophia and Garrett remained on their porch, 2 people who had found each other against the odds and built a life of meaning and purpose. Their love story had started with integrity, with Sophia's refusal to spread rumors and Garrett's courage in breaking his silence to propose. But it had grown into something far greater, a partnership built on respect, understanding, and unwavering commitment to living honestly. In the house behind them, they could hear James practicing his reading, preparing for school the next day. They could see lights coming on in the homes of their neighbors, families settling in for the evening. The town of Republic had grown and changed, but at its heart, it was still the same community that had given them both a second chance. "Garrett," Sophia said softly, and he turned to her. "Thank you." "For what?" "For trusting me with your silence, for finding your voice for me, for building this beautiful life together." He smiled that smile that still, after 25 years, made her heart flutter. "No," he said, his voice full of love and wonder. "Thank you for everything, for always." They kissed as the stars came out overhead. Two souls perfectly matched, two hearts beating as one. And if someone had been watching from the street, they would have seen what all of Republic had come to recognize, that the Reynolds couple represented something rare and precious. They were living proof that integrity and love could triumph over gossip and judgment, that truth mattered more than popularity, and that sometimes the greatest love stories begin with the simplest acts of kindness and respect. The years continued to pass, each one adding new chapters to their story. In 1910, when Sophia was 53 and Garrett 56, they became grandparents for the first time. Samuel and his wife welcomed a daughter, and Sophia and Garrett fell in love all over again, this time with the tiny person who had their family's eyes and spirit. More grandchildren followed over the years. Grace married a teacher from Springfield and had 3 children. James married a lawyer like himself, and they had 2 children. The Reynolds family grew, spreading across Missouri and beyond, but always maintaining the values that Sophia and Garrett had instilled: integrity, kindness, and the courage to stand up for what was right. Sophia retired from teaching in 1912 at the age of 55, having taught for more than 30 years. The town held a grand celebration, and the new school building, which had been funded in part by Garrett's successful horse breeding business, was named Turner Hall in her honor. At the ceremony, Garrett spoke publicly for one of the rare times in his life. "My wife," he said, his voice strong and clear, "taught me that communication is about more than words. She taught me that integrity means doing right even when it's hard. She taught me that love is patient and kind and never fails. She taught hundreds of children over 3 decades, but she taught me first, and I'm the better man for it." Sophia wept with pride and joy as the crowd applauded. She had never sought recognition or praise. She had simply tried to live according to her principles. But seeing the impact of her life's work, the students who had gone on to become teachers, doctors, lawyers, ministers, and good parents, she felt deeply satisfied. Garrett continued his horse breeding operation for several more years, finally retiring in 1916 at the age of 63. By then, his reputation had spread far beyond Missouri. His horses were prized throughout the Midwest for their intelligence, strength, and temperament. He had built something lasting, something that would continue even after he was gone. But more importantly, he had built a family and a life. He had gone from being a man running from false accusations, silenced by trauma and fear, to a man who spoke when it mattered and kept counsel when it didn't. He had learned that strength came in many forms, that healing was possible, and that love could restore what cruelty had stolen. On a warm evening in June 1920, Sophia and Garrett sat on their porch as they had thousands of times before. They were both in their 60s now, their hair gray, their bodies slower but their minds sharp and their love undiminished. 63 years old, Garrett mused. Where did the time go? Into a life well lived, Sophia replied. Into children raised and students taught. Into horses bred and a community served. Into love given and received. Garrett reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining in a gesture as natural as breathing. Would you do it all again? Exactly the same way? Sophia thought about the question seriously. She thought about the struggles they had faced, the gossip, the judgment, the financial hardships of their early years. She thought about the sleepless nights with sick children, the worries about money, the challenges of maintaining principles in a world that often valued convenience over character. "Yes," she said finally, absolutely certain. "I would do it all exactly the same, because it led to us, to a life of meaning, to love that has only grown deeper with time. I have no regrets, Garrett, not a single one." He lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "Neither do I. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, Sophia Reynolds, the very best thing." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over Republic. The town had changed so much since that day in 1879, when Sophia had stepped off the stagecoach, a young woman of 22 looking for a fresh start. The railroad had brought progress and growth. Automobiles were beginning to appear on the streets. The world was changing rapidly, rushing toward a new century of technological marvels and social upheaval. But some things remained constant. The church still stood on Main Street, its steeple pointing toward heaven. The school, now Turner Hall, still rang with children's voices each day. And the Reynolds home still stood as a testament to love, integrity, and the courage to live according to one's principles. As darkness fell and the stars emerged, Sophia and Garrett went inside, arm in arm. Their story had begun with her refusal to spread rumors and his courage in breaking his silence to propose. But it had become so much more, a testament to the power of integrity, the healing nature of love, and the truth that doing right matters more than being popular. In the years that followed, Sophia and Garrett continued to enjoy their retirement, spending time with their children and grandchildren, traveling occasionally, and remaining active in their community. They were beloved figures in Republic, symbols of what a good marriage and a good life could look like. Garrett passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1928 at the age of 75. His funeral was attended by hundreds of people, including many who had purchased his horses over the years and countless others, whose lives he had touched through his quiet kindness and integrity. At the service, each of his children spoke, sharing memories of a father who had taught them that strength came in many forms, that silence could be powerful, and that love was the greatest gift anyone could give or receive. Sophia grieved deeply, but also with gratitude. She had been blessed with 48 years of marriage to a man she loved and admired. She had their children and grandchildren, and she had a lifetime of memories to sustain her. She lived another 12 years, passing away in 1940 at the age of 83. In those final years, she remained sharp and engaged, beloved by her family and community. She saw the world change dramatically: the Great Depression, the beginning of another world war, the continued march of progress. But she held fast to the principles that had guided her entire life: integrity, kindness, and the refusal to judge others based on rumor or appearance. At her funeral, the church was packed with people whose lives she had touched. Former students, now middle-aged or elderly themselves, spoke of how Miss Turner, later Mrs. Reynolds, had taught them not just reading and mathematics, but also character and integrity. Her children and grandchildren spoke of a woman who had loved deeply, lived honestly, and never compromised her principles for convenience or popularity. And as she was laid to rest beside Garrett in the Republic Cemetery, under a sky as wide and blue as the one that had welcomed her to Missouri so many years before, everyone present understood that they had witnessed something rare: a life lived with purpose, a love that had endured and deepened over decades, and a legacy that would continue through generations. The Reynolds children, Samuel, Grace, and James, carried on their parents' example. They taught their own children about the importance of integrity, about refusing to spread rumors, about treating people with dignity and respect. They told and retold the story of how Sophia had refused to gossip about the silent cowboy, how Garrett had found his voice through her acceptance and love, and how that simple act of integrity had blossomed into a love story for the ages. Turner Hall continued to educate children for decades, a living monument to Sophia's dedication to truth and learning. Garrett's bloodline of horses remained prized throughout the region, known for their intelligence and spirit. And the house where they had raised their family became a gathering place for Reynolds clan reunions, a place where stories were shared and values were passed down. The story of Sophia Turner and Garrett Reynolds became a legend in Republic, Missouri, not a legend of grand gestures or dramatic rescues, but a legend of something far more valuable. A love built on integrity, respect, and the courage to live according to one's principles. It was a story that reminded people that how you treat others matters, that refusing to spread rumors is an act of courage, and that true love sees past the surface to the soul beneath. And so their legacy lived on, not just in their descendants, but in the very fabric of the community they had served. Republic became known as a town where people minded their own business in the best way, not out of indifference, but out of respect for privacy and dignity. Where people offered help instead of speculation. Where character mattered more than popularity. It all traced back to a young schoolteacher who refused to spread rumors, and a silent cowboy who found the courage to speak his love. Their story proved that integrity, patience, and love could change not just individual lives but entire communities. And that, perhaps, was the greatest legacy of all the knowledge that one person, living honestly and refusing to compromise their principles, could make a real and lasting difference in the world. The end.